In a sea of viral short-form videos on the internet, one that's grown in notoriety is online skits. These range and vary depending on the circumstances, from situational to satirical. They occupy a space that makes sense within a medium designed around quick consumption. It's why there's so many social media websites adhering to it, from like YouTube Shorts to Instagram Reels to Snap to TikTok, and well, you get the idea. It's important to stress that the existence of these videos is a byproduct of the algorithm and a new way of distributing content. People have figured out how to present comics, films, educational videos, everything you can think of in this format, and naturally, comedy is going to be a part of it. This shift in the medium is still derivative and inspired by how media is iterated in other forms, namely stand-up comedians and short skits inspired by them. Let's take the Chappelle Show or the Chris Rock Show. Most of these skits last roughly 3 to 4 minutes before transitioning into the next joke. That's because the medium is designed to be consumed in short bursts and separated. It's only natural then that this translated well into the digital realm with short form videos. Obviously this can be really obnoxious sometimes. A big thing a large majority of black comedians are heralded up for is their edgy, controversial subject matter. There was a time where being described as edgy wasn't this ironic jab, but instead a sincere compliment for going against the grain and doing something outlandishly different from the norm. The Boondocks was edgy, the Chappelle Show was edgy, the Chris Rock Show was edgy, Richard Pryor was edgy. A majority of black movies, by virtue of being such, were considered edgy. It's important to remember this when we look at their perception, and by extension, how these forms of media branded and sold themselves. They were branded as unfiltered and raw, and finally, satirical. When marketing the Boondocks, how do you think the Boondocks was sold to people? The truth is back. The whole Boondocks Season 3 marketing campaign was selling the Boondocks as some underground truth, some undercover truth. Boondocks bootleg. It's brandishing its appeal around what it tells you is true, and sells back and commercializes it to some capacity, its own ideas of truth. Huey is the centerpiece of this propaganda, but more on that later. More on that now, wait. Okay, Huey is a black radical socialist. He is nihilistic, he is anti-religious, he is perpetually mad at everything. And yet I see him brandished over so many people's profile pictures. He is idolized as this fictional hero. And I can't help but go, but most of you don't agree with him. I'll go on a Huey account and they'll be retweeting Jordan Peterson videos, subscribe to Andrew Tate, and they're on their 5th reading of the Power Book. It is time to stop. But why does edgy black media tend to be so successful? Blackness is already going against the grain. In a system of white supremacy, embracing one's blackness is inherently going against the grain. And while aspects of blackness have been commercialized either to push a narrative or for the sake of monetary convenience, a consistency I notice is that controversial black media tends to excel. There's a weird narrative that black people are getting more woke, and I don't believe that. The consistency in the presentation of black people in pop culture is that of controversy and immediate and effective shock value. Be that traumatic, satirical, or profane, there's a very clear push for black people in the media to operate outside an existing norm, and that naturally manifests itself through controversy. I've done YouTube for a while now, I'm familiar, right? Controversy creates a conversation, and the more people talk and argue about what you're creating, the more buzz and traffic you ultimately drive to your product, right? That's how you get the views. There's a reason why they're telling you to leave a comment. It's because that's what the algorithm will push. No one is incentivized to stop being controversial because there's so much money to be made while doing it. Add this to the inherent controversy tied to creating black media within white spaces. It only makes sense that we'd find ourselves often playing this role. No one is incentivized to stop being controversial because there's so much money to be made while doing it. Add this to the inherent controversy tied to creating black media within white spaces. It only makes sense we'd find ourselves often playing this role. This monetary incentive can in many ways be a restriction, and we'll explore that in just a bit. Trey Rags is a TikToker that blew up because of his red shirt gag. He played this guy that was needlessly hostile and looking for a fight. It was funny because a lot of people know people like this. Satire covers a very broad spectrum, but slowly, his content began to change though. It became more and more, what's the word? targeted and ableist and after you get past the Bible verse, I don't know why that's there. One look at the comment section and it's just people saying, finally, someone said it. Said what? His content grew more and more controversial to the point where if you were to remove all the videos where he makes jokes about DV and women in compromising positions and disabled people and trans, you get the point, right? If you removed all those videos, the channel would barely even exist. This is Trey Rags' brand now, and he can't do anything else. Well, he can, but it would require betraying what he built his foundations on. I watched his channel and influence grow and saw with each video how he pushed the line more and more. And I don't say that as a compliment, I say that as an observation on just how creatively bankrupt his ideas were becoming. What stood out to me was that the humor could only be found in how controversial it was. Trey Rags is a recent example, but speaks to a general issue. It's not that these people are incapable of being funny, more often than not they are. It's that there's an over-reliance on punching down. The only people that find trans violence funny are people that aren't trans. The only people that find humor in abled people impersonating the disabled are people without disabilities. It's this astute lack of self-awareness that always rears its head in. And I'm sure there's people, the fabled, I'm this thing and I don't think it was a big deal. You know, it's never a red flag. But outside that tokenary resistance, we all know who these things are for. Let's not be coy, let's not be dumb, let's actually be real. Let's be so real. When did blackness in the media become so defined by the ability to be outrageous and offensive? And why is that like the spectrum of quality? Why are there so many black men so comfortable with putting on wigs and impersonating black women? Everyone laughs at Tyler Perry, and for good reason. But what makes this any different? Cat Williams and Dave Chappelle, I've seen they're emasculating black men by putting them in dresses narrative, right? I've seen that, right? So can someone explain to me, can someone genuinely explain to me, what about this is empowering? What makes this any different? No, let's be so fucking real. Let's be so real. What makes making fun of black women empowering? Much like the media before it, the success is defined by the audience, by how inflammatory it is, with no regard for what it's actually saying. To throw a bunch of positive in it, you don't do that on cable at 11 at night, Magruder said. The right image is totally unfunny. Look, it's very calculated. We're not going to preach to people. It's not the strip. If there's a group of smart people out there that get what we're saying, even if it's the minority, we're happy with that. Aaron has gone on record several times explaining why the Boondocks isn't like the comic strip, and the consistent sentiment is no one would like it or it doesn't fit the demographic. The pilot for the series was initially rejected for being too networky. The Boondocks has always been rewarded for edgy, controversial content and ultimately rejected when it doesn't do that. Let me even not really say rejected, it just got less attention. I'm gonna put a pin in that. Look, I'm a Boondocks head, right? Everyone knows I'm the Boondocks head. Not every episode is great, not every takeaway is executed perfectly, they can't all be Deep Hewitt. The worst episode of the Boondocks is called The Story of Jimmy Rebel, and it's about Uncle Ruckus and a racist singer. And that's the joke. That's the joke. The average Boondocks episode costs $400K, but there's nothing here outside that. Outside that absurdity, this episode doesn't say much of anything, and none of the jokes end up hitting as a result. And this is a season 3 episode. I like that season. I used this episode as a conduit to make a point about how the controversial premise has replaced the need for a joke. Let's double down. Let's get our Boondocks history in. Okay. Aaron has gone on record stating that if it wasn't for 9/11, the strip would have ended. To him, it gave him, and by extension the strip, some form of purpose, something that needed to be said. There's a young fan inside me that hears that and says, yeah, and I'm happy he felt more inspired. And that period of the strip was such an interesting cultural time capsule for what the climate was like in the early 2000s after the attack. Going after patriotism and the war on terror, it was cool. But then there's that cynic. I've documented this series' growth very elaborately in the past. I'm aware that Reginald Hudlin had a vision for pushing a certain image of Aaron, and by extension the Boondocks, in the media. And after his comic strip was removed, he received such a massive boom in media coverage and keynotes and buzz around his franchise. I'm aware that fans of the strip grew frustrated, tired of seeing the same reused frames, wondering why it's been years since they've seen certain characters. A series once praised for its artwork became static and predictable, at times even self-aware. That what was once an exploration into the lives of young black children in a mostly white suburb and navigating that slowly became the daily rantings of Huey Freeman and the latest trend behind his couch. The pursuit of controversial material exposes one's lack of genuine material. Because ultimately, controversy is a bag, one that is fleeting and in the end, hollow. The purpose of this diatribe isn't to disparage any particular form of black entertainment. My channel is borderline just the Boondocks. I need to stress that this isn't some elaborate attack on it or any particular thing. No, it's kind of to ask why blackness has been made to occupy this role to begin with. I look at what Dave Chappelle's doing now on his 5th Netflix special about trans people and how he doesn't understand them and why. I wonder why people do the things that they do. Even this celebration of being targeted has always felt very weird to me. It gives me cult vibes. It's like, we got enemies here. It's like they're trying to stop him and you guys can't stop him. Like we are very obsessed with the enemy. This underdog story, this narrative. We are so enamored with it. We love this idea. By exoticizing controversy, it's almost incorrectly inflating the value of what someone has to say, when that's simply not true. Oftentimes, it's just a substitute for substance. And it needs to be made clear the issue isn't inherently controversy. Our existence is inherently controversial when framed around these systems. No, black people deserve to feel comfortable being daring. We encourage each other to be unapologetic and true to ourselves. But what happens when those ideas go unchallenged? I want you to remember that a majority of the shows and media we watch are products of larger scale visions and ideas. That even the Boondocks had to change and recontextualize what it was to fit Adult Swim and their sensibilities, to fit the newspaper and what they would allow, right? That on its own, the Boondocks was deemed unworthy of being produced. That somewhere along the line, network executives made whiteness synonymous with normality and blackness synonymous with shock value. James Baldwin says whiteness is a metaphor for power. And sometimes I wonder what that says about blackness. That in commercializing a specific image of blackness, it has become the de facto idea of the identity. Just by virtue of it producing the most profit, it naturally has the most influence and reach. And the scariest part of that being that these things are self-actualizing. We are beyond that point in a digital age of independently produced media. Yet it still adheres to the facile beliefs of age-old executives. And it's because after decades of doing it, it's now what makes the most money. I got a video about this. They don't need to sell the diamond engagement ring as a campaign anymore. People just internalized it. You don't need to sell the war on drugs. People very much associate blackness with criminality. You don't need to sell black entrepreneurialism as an aesthetic to aspire towards. There is decades of propaganda around it. And without knowing, we perpetuate these cycles by adhering to the algorithm and what produces the most profit, not knowing that these things have been defined ever so long ago. I'm going to end this video and talk a little bit about Caleb C. He had a video years ago, and to be honest, the punchline wasn't like terrible, especially compared to some of these, but it could be seen as transphobic, and I get it. And you know what he did? He took the video down. And you don't know what happened? Nothing. Nothing changed because he didn't build his brand around that. His skits were creative and subversive in a different way, to the point where he could comfortably remove that video and nothing happens. But the same can't be said for a lot of other channels. Because when your whole bag is punching down, that's the only way you can keep yourself up. Black art, be it comedic, serious, romantic, illustrative, it all has value to me. But it doesn't need to be forcefully controversial to be successful. You do yourself such a gross disservice to adhere to that idea. Man, to give you guys some context, I'm recording this video during work and they're messaging me during work. Incredible. Anyway, man, support me so I don't have to do this anymore. But it doesn't need to be forcefully controversial to be successful. You do yourself such a gross disservice to adhere to the idea. Like, as a resounding rule, our capacity to create is endless. There are some incredible projects I've seen throughout my life, both in having the honor of being a part of and getting to see the development of. Ones that don't rely on punching down to make a point, that can explore and engage with topics complicated or simple to make me laugh. It's not hard to provide shock value, to be crude and have no regard for other marginalized groups, and sometimes even our own. I mean, that's what that's what white people are doing all the time anyway. I just think we're better than that. We pray that tomorrow is better than today. Power to the people. Peace.